Welcome to the Untold Tales audio anthologies. Written by Philip Cahill and narrated by Melissa Del Toro Schaffner. Miranda. The voice was male and spoke with such clarity that I thought for a moment I was speaking to a machine. It was one of those calls that came out of nowhere. One of those that start a sequence of events that ultimately deliver a life-changing shock. He said he wanted to confirm my identity and address. I opened the phone's telepathic channel, but the caller was clearly not a telepath because he didn't respond to my request for identification, and I couldn't sense my message reaching his mind. I was about to hang up when he mentioned Miranda. This made me pause. I told him he needed to send proof of his identity before I'd talk further. I hadn't seen or thought about her for years. I've been through several regenerations, so my memories about Miranda were pretty old. As I waited for the caller to send me his ID file, I tapped into my memory archive and began a search. The first fragment arrived in a few seconds. The last time I saw her, she was singing in a bar no one's ever heard of, in a city no one's ever heard of. It was back in the late 27th century, when I lived in France, before she'd become famous. Before she'd become known from Mercury to the moons of Pluto and beyond. Some more memory detail arrived. The bar sat squeezed between a shop selling overpriced bric-a-brac and a superette in the warren of medieval streets close to the Place Saint-Sauveur in Caen. In those days, the Bar de la Tour was my last stop on the way home. It was where I would drink a final few whiskeys to give me the energy to walk up the hill to my empty bungalow in the Quartier Saint-Gabriel. She was close to the end of her set when I arrived. I managed to find a seat at the end of the counter, wedged against the wall. I was lucky because the place was crowded with students that night. They were abnormally quiet, focusing on the small stage at the back of the room. Miranda was accompanied by a keyboard player whose bulk took up most of the stage. He appeared to be fat rather than muscular, with long, wiry hair and dark glasses. I didn't like the look of him, but he played the notes as if seeped straight out of his neural substrate. Impossible, of course, because, like my caller, he was also telepathically blind. I remember the way he caressed the keyboard. It was as if he was frightened it might collapse under the weight of his hands. Miranda stood to the right of the musician at the edge of the stage. She didn't move as she sang. She kept her mouth close to the oval disc of the microphone that floated in front of her face, partially obscuring it. She wore a neurotransmission circlet that amplified her telepathy. Beneath it, her long copper-colored hair cascaded over her shoulders. She wore a silvery dress that clung to her figure and sparkled in the light. She'd changed a lot since the last time I'd seen her. I found another level of memory detail about that night in the bar. I held a banknote between my index and middle finger and signaled to the barman, Daniel, for a whiskey. Sometimes this would work. Sometimes it wouldn't, and I'd have to get out of my seat and lean over the bar to bellow out my order. I was in luck that night. He seemed to be in a good mood. I swallowed a large mouthful of whiskey and settled against the wall. Miranda had reached the last song of her set. It was her breakthrough song, Les âmes perdues, The Lost Souls. A song that spoke of loss, of sorrow, of loneliness that was only just made bearable by memories of a transcendent love. She began to sing so softly that the first few phrases could barely be heard. She didn't look like a telepath at all. None of the glacial expression or the piercing intensity of gaze. Her face and eyes revealed the same kind of warm-heartedness that you can sometimes see in the faces of telepathically blind people. She had an excellent physical voice. It was melodious and powerful, and she enunciated perfectly. As she sang, she began to build the emotion, using the power of her physical voice with extraordinary dexterity. Behind her appeared an image of two classically beautiful lovers floating toward each other against the celestial backdrop. She went into telepath and augmented the vocal line, making it more musical and profound. When the lovers' bodies briefly touched, then parted, She added an emotional chord structure and poured more power into the components of her singing voice. She uttered a plaintive call as the space between the lovers increased. I knew the song, of course, so I responded to the call, telepathically. I, the object of her love, struggling to get back to her, clawing at the emptiness of interstellar space. I had no amplification, but Miranda sensed me. I couldn't tell if she had recognized me or not. She began to extemporize around my response, flashing a few microseconds of gentle mockery at me alone, before dissolving her derision into a sincere, enveloping warmth that she shared with the crowd. I responded to her warmth with a gesture of respectful and humble admiration and continued the lyrics as best I could. She began adding layer upon layer of additional embellishments. She seemed both herself, her lover, and the passion of love itself. At the same time, she augmented the power of the vocal line again. I carried on for as long as I could, but I was exhausted. She sent me a personal message of thanks as I lapsed into telepathic silence. But there was still no hint of recognition. I felt the attention of her mind moving away from me as she prepared for the climax of the song. She took her time, gestured to the musician to subdue his keyboard, and focused on her extraordinary vocal and telepathic voices. When she reached the first notes of the finale, I sensed that she'd decided to hold back from unleashing the full power of the emotion that she was capable of expressing, as if she didn't want to cross a threshold of intensity that could cause fear and pain. In the final minutes of the song, the keyboard player stopped playing, and she concentrated on her physical voice, eased off on the telepathic augmentation, and poured out the final phrases into the souls of the audience. Then, blackness. In the darkness, Miranda was invisible. The keyboard player started playing again as the lights came up, but she was gone. I signaled to the barman for another drink, but he shook his head. The applause thundered off the ceiling. I wanted to run from the bar to the street door at the back of the building. I wanted to thank her for singing my song like that, but I knew she wouldn't want to speak to me. Part of the reason she could sing so powerfully about emotional pain was me. I should never have left her the way I did. As I said, I never saw her again. I think the guilt kept me away. Guilt at what I'd done compounded with the remorse at the way she publicized my song and earned me money that I wasted, never enjoyed. The royalties had dried up after 50 years when the rights to the song had entered the public domain. I was not completely broke. I could still afford whiskey, but only just. The identity file arrived, so I resumed the call. He was a researcher from a law firm. Lawyers often use non-telepaths as investigators because they're cheaper, and they tend to be very good at processing physical evidence. Miranda had gone missing on one of the Saturnian moons 5 years ago. They'd found the body only a month ago. He wouldn't commit himself. Said only that he'd called to confirm my identity and my whereabouts. If you're adept at speaking, it's pretty easy to extract information from the mind of a non-telepath. They don't have the protective reflexes like the rest of us. All you need is a strong voice and the ability to pose multiple questions at high speed. I increased his cognitive load with a barrage of questions, focusing on detail and coming at him from multiple angles. Who? What kind of lawyer did he work for? In what firm? Based where? Where was the exact place, and what was the manner of death? Who confirmed it? What is the name and address of your boss, and what are his qualifications? This guy was good, but he didn't really stand a chance against me. I tapped into the legal AI supplied by my insurance company and cross-referenced his replies. I thanked the caller and ended the call. The AI was pretty certain that Miranda had left me the bulk of her estate. I paused. I shouldn't have. I should have shut down the access to my memory archive. I should have set up a filtering protocol to deal with my memories of the call. It was too late. I felt a cascade of thought structures roaring along my neural pathways. I was hit by a multifaceted shockwave. Ancient memories of the endorphin-induced euphoria of my first realization of the depth of my feelings for her. memories of the elation aftershock, and memories of the emotional storm that had raged through my mind in our early times together. There was also the shock of her death. I didn't realize it would affect me in this way. It was clear that she had never moved on from me. She hadn't succeeded in burying her feelings as effectively as I had. But then, she was much more caring and much less self-absorbed than me. I felt ashamed. There was only one thing I could do. I augmented the parameters of the search routine on my memory archive, and I began to construct a holding space, a small metaverse of my memories of her. It would take some time, but it would be my monument to Miranda, a place where I could visit and immerse myself in my recollections, a place where I could tell her how sorry I was, a place where I could fully explore the depths of my shame. Thank you for listening. We love our listeners, fans, and patrons here at Untold Tales, and we hope you love the stories that we're bringing to you month after month on the first of each month. Please consider leaving us a review on Podchaser. Once again, thank you so much for listening, and have a wonderful day.